Welcome to the design video of my VR game prototype, Nova Mondo. Nova Mondo is a fantasy multiplayer VR funhouse. It was my last university project and is a proof of concept of how VR can expand multiplayer games. It was a solo project, which I designed and developed completely by myself. To make it, I used Unreal Engine 4.14 and the HTC Vive. The design origin of the game really comes from my love for LARP games. When comparing any digital and non-digital games, the main and obvious difference is that, of course, one is experienced through a screen, while the other one happens in the physical world. But VR adds a new form of comparison. What is the difference between playing, say, Monopoly around a table with your friends or around a digital table in VR, always with your friends? What I wanted to do was to test what VR could do to simulate a LARP experience and maybe enhance it thanks to the digital medium. The first issue to solve was to achieve the visualizations of players' movement on the network. It was easy enough to rig an Unreal mannequin skeleton to the Vive controllers and headset. However, making so that a player B connected in the same game lobby could see the movements of player A was quite of a challenge, but in the end I succeeded. This is really the key aspect of the game. Achieve full embodiment as much as possible in a virtual environment throughout VR. Originally, I planned on using the Kinect, and I actually achieved merging Kinect tracking with a VR set to also track legs and body. But later on, I decided to keep the project relevant to industrial standards by abandoning the Kinect and focusing only on the Vive. Once achieved this primary goal, I had fun developing other features. It must always be considered that all these features had to be made multiplayer compatible. Picking up and throwing things was pretty much already set up in Engine, and a quick thing I made to carry around weapons was to set up a holster system to hold them on yourself. Another small thing I did was to implement a getting stuck feature, where if you throw a weapon against a soft target, it gets stuck. I knew since before starting to develop the project that magic was going to be a big part of the game. The original idea on how to implement it comes from my fond memories of Dungeons & Dragons. If you ever played D&D as a magic-wielding class, you will know that spells were not only a matter of mutter the magical formula and things explode. The game clearly states that your character has to clearly enunciate a formula, use some focus materials for some spells, and then perform complex body positions that are simply described mechanically as the somatic components of the spell. The idea of having players have to perform specific and more or less accurate movements to cast the different spells was born out of this concept. Using a magnificent plugin for Unreal called Gesture Tracker VR by Hunter Delattre, introducing this mechanic was quite easy and straightforward. In the end, I managed to create 4 spells. The Firebolt, which requires you to aim and place a hit by pointing your hands towards the enemy. A Fire Blast, which is an area of effect spell placed through aiming with head positioning, a self-heal spell, and a Fire Cone erupting from both hands. The Firebolt soon proved very difficult to place. The balls will behave as rocks of sorts on a descending parabol, and aiming takes quite some time to learn. Therefore, the Firebolt is not very likely to hit, but when it does, it deals massive damage. Both hands can independently cast fireballs, independently of what the other hand is doing or holding. The Fire Blast is easier to place as you use your sight to actually define the area of effects of the spell, but it requires both hands to be cast and deals less damage. The heal spell is not effective if spammed under direct attack, as it still takes time to perform the movements and doesn't deal much damage for every cast. So you can survive against an opponent that is hitting you hard by simply spamming heals. Lastly, the Fire Cone is very short range and deals a medium amount of damage. It becomes dangerous if the caster is good at avoiding incoming damage while at the same time keep the adversary in the cone. Of course, magic is not the only feature of the game. You can pick up and throw also weapons. The immediate problem I had to solve about wielding weapons is what is known in the LARP scene as tapping. A real sword weighs between 3 to 10 kilograms, so wielding it is a rather slow business. LARP swords instead are made of foam and latex, and so they are very light. and you can do with them things that would be impossible with a real sword. The Vive controllers are even lighter, so you could just wave them around senselessly. To penalize this behavior, I introduced a mechanic that I call cadence. Every weapon has a cadence value, that is the amount of time that has to pass between two successive attacks on the same enemy to deal maximum weapon damage. Below the time, damage dealt decreases exponentially, so tapping does small to almost no damage. Damage is applied to a hidden health score. The game is built with the edges in mind, so all UI is kept to a minimum, so much so that the only menu that appears in the game is in the login level. However, to give a player an idea of how much health he has left, the site will tint of a red hue when the health reaches 50%. The lower the health goes from there on, the more intense the hue becomes, until the player eventually dies. Every time some damage is taken, the periphery of the player's sight will flash of solid red, and a sound cue is played. Same thing goes when healing is received, but with a green flash and a different and more friendly sound cue. So, between magic and weapons, combat is the most heavily coded source of content. But the idea behind the game is to allow free interaction among players, enabled by VR. However, one absolutely core mechanic was missing to achieve this: locomotion. If you ever developed for VR, you know that moving around is a problem. The mind is easily tricked into believing that what it sees around in a VR headset is real. But as soon as you move the world in a way that is not compatible with how the body is moving, the mind rejects it, and dizziness and motion sickness are triggered. To solve this issue, I knew I wanted to have a movement mechanic that was triggered by body positioning, making the body do something that the mind will perceive as compatible with moving around. At first I thought of leaning forwards or backwards, but then I thought of using movements of the arms. Researching exactly that, I stumbled on an incredibly elegant solution, which I implemented right away. Basically, you press the triggers on the side of the Vive controllers and then swing your arms back and forth as if you were walking or running. The fastest and the more widely you move them, the fastest you move in the game. This solution proved ideal, as motion sickness due to locomotion was almost completely absent and only presented in one case where the whole VR thing was already given the tester issues. Alright, that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any comments or questions, write them down in the comments below. Till next time!